On April 9th, a new report from the United Nations delivered a stark warning. A warning not about a single country, but about an entire group of nations. According to the report, developing economies are facing a $4 trillion financing gap, a gap so large that it threatens to reverse decades of economic progress. This warning is tied to what policymakers are calling the Sevilla Commitment, a framework aimed at stabilizing global development financing. But behind the policy language lies a more urgent reality. Geopolitical fragmentation is changing the rules of the global economy, and for many nations in the global south, those changes are becoming unsustainable. Rising borrowing costs, currency instability, security pressures, and a growing dilemma that defines the crisis. The Sevilla Commitment was designed to address a growing imbalance in global finance. Its goal: ensure that developing nations can access affordable funding for growth, infrastructure, and stability. But implementation faces a critical challenge. The global financial system is no longer operating in a unified environment. Debt levels across developing nations have surged. At the same time, access to affordable financing has declined. Countries are now borrowing at rates not seen in over 2 decades. Several factors are driving the rise in borrowing costs. Global interest rate increases, investor risk aversion, currency volatility, geopolitical uncertainty. The global economy is fragmenting into competing blocks. Trade routes shift, investment flows become selective, risk premiums increase. Egypt represents a clear example of the pressures facing the global south. Rising debt obligations, currency devaluation, and increasing security concerns. Pakistan faces a similar but more acute challenge. Debt pressures intersect with political instability and regional security risks. At the heart of the crisis lies a difficult choice. Do governments prioritize debt repayment to maintain international credibility, or domestic security to maintain internal stability? In regions facing unrest, security spending cannot be reduced, but debt obligations remain fixed. As economic uncertainty deepens across the global south, another less visible force begins to accelerate the crisis: capital flight. Investors, both domestic and international, often respond quickly to rising risk. Funds are moved out of vulnerable economies and redirected toward more stable markets. This shift can happen quietly, but its effects are significant. Currency values weaken further, foreign reserves decline, and governments face increasing difficulty financing essential services. For local businesses, the impact is immediate. Access to credit tightens, expansion plans are delayed, hiring slows or stops altogether. In some cases, entire sectors begin to contract, amplifying the broader economic slowdown. Capital flight also creates a feedback loop. As more funds leave, confidence declines further, triggering even more outflows. For policymakers, this adds another layer to an already complex challenge. It is no longer just about managing debt or maintaining security. It is about restoring confidence, both at home and abroad. And in today's fragmented global economy, that may be the most difficult task of all. Currency devaluation amplifies the crisis. Imports become more expensive, inflation rises, public pressure increases. For many countries in the global south, the economic crisis is not only reflected in debt figures or financial markets. It is felt most immediately in the cost of everyday survival. Rising global energy prices have pushed up the cost of transportation, electricity, and fuel. At the same time, disruptions in global supply chains have increased the price of essential food imports. For nations that rely heavily on imported wheat, rice, or fuel, even small price increases can have outsized effects. Households are forced to spend a larger share of their income on basic necessities. Governments, already under financial pressure, face growing demands to subsidize food and energy costs. But subsidies come at a cost. They increase fiscal deficits and deepen debt burdens, feeding back into the larger crisis. This creates another difficult balancing act: reduce subsidies and risk public unrest, or maintain them and risk long-term financial instability. In this environment, economic policy becomes more than a technical exercise. It becomes a question of survival for both governments and the populations they serve. Economic stress often translates into political instability. Governments face rising dissatisfaction. International institutions play a critical role, but their solutions often come with conditions. The future depends on whether global coordination improves. The $4 trillion gap is more than a number. It is a signal. For deeper insights into global economics, geopolitical risk, visit nexusinsight.org. Subscribe.